From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm very excited to have you here and to have our 5 under 35 honorees here for this evening's reading. My name is Rob Casper. I'm the head of the Poetry and Literature Center. And for those of you who weren't here this afternoon, our 5 under 35 honorees did a terrific job in a panel discussion, and now they will give us the voices of their books, their novels and collections of short stories. Before we begin, let me ask you to turn off your cell phones and any other electronic devices you might have that will interfere with this event. And let me tell you a little bit about the Poetry and Literature Center. We are home to the Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry, and we also sponsor events like this, as well as lectures, panels, symposia, and such throughout the year. If you want to find out more about the Poetry and Literature Center and events like this, you can sign our sign-up sheet, which is outside. We also have some materials about the center itself. And you can visit us online at www.loc.gov/poetry, where this event will show up in a few months along with the panel for you to see if you did miss it. Also, on your seat, you should have a survey. We're trying to figure out how to better serve our audience here in DC with literary events like this. So if you could fill it out and give it to either me or to Anya Kreitney, who's in the back, or Catalina Gomez, who's in the back too, in that corner afterwards, that would be terrific. The 535 program is an inspiring program. I first went to the launch of 535 a decade ago. It was wonderful to reminisce a little bit about it today and to get a chance to hear this year's honorees talk about the art. And I'm really, really eager to hear them read a little bit more. I'm going to let the National Book Foundation Program Manager, Benjamin Samuel, talk a little bit about the National Book Foundation and then introduce our 5 under 35 honorees. So please join me in welcoming him.
Hello, thank you, Rob, and thank you to the Library of Congress and to all of you for coming out. I'm Ben Samuel. I work for the National Book Foundation. Our mission is to expand the audience for literature in America. We do that in a number of ways, including through the National Book Awards, which were just announced last night. We're actually fortunate to have one of our finalists here with us tonight as well, Angela Flournoy. We also have some other programs called Book Up, which brings books and reading to underserved communities for middle school students to get them really exposed to the world of literature and develop a lifelong love of reading. And we also run 5 under 35, which is why we're here tonight. So the 5 under 35 program honors writers under the age of 35, each of whom have written and published one book of fiction, either a novel or a short story collection. These honorees have been picked by National Book Award winners, finalists, or starting this year, which is our 10-year anniversary, they are selected by former 5 under 35 honorees. Since 2006, the 5 under 35 program, which is sponsored by the Amazon Literary Partnership, has consistently recognized young debut writers poised to make a lasting impression on the literary landscape. Previous honorees include Danielle Evans, Nam Lee, Valeria Luiselli, Karen Russell, Kirsten Valdez-Quaid, Justin Torres, Claire V. Watkins, Tiffany Yannick, and as well as National Book Award finalist Taya Obret and 2014 National Book Award for Fiction winner Phil Cly. And we are blessed to have our 2015 honorees here with us this evening. Our first reader is Azareen van der Vliet Oloomi. She is the author of FRA Keeler. She's the recipient of a 2015 Whiting Writers Award, a MacDowell Fellowship, and a Fulbright Fellowship to Catalonia, Spain. She has lived in Italy, Spain, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, and the USA. She currently teaches in the MFA program in creative writing at the University of Notre Dame and splits her time between South Bend, Indiana, and Florence, Italy. Please welcome Azareen.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. So I'm just going to read a little section from the first chapter of the novel, and it's about a man who purchases the home of FRA Keeler and then begins to investigate the circumstances of his death. It was a few days after I had moved into the home. This home I had just bought thinking it belongs to FRA Keeler, though I'm now beginning to suspect that I am wrong, or that there are two FRA Keelers, the right one and the wrong one, and that the death certificate in the drawer belongs to one and the rest of the papers to the other, but this is a matter for later. In any case, I had just moved in. I was grinding beans for my morning coffee when I spied from the kitchen window behind some trees a small circular wooden cabin, a yurt. From where I was standing in the kitchen, behind the sink, looking through the window, it seemed the door to the yurt was unlatched. It was swinging to and fro against the wind. I decided to go and have a look. I crossed the yard and walked through the trees I had seen from the window. Their branches interweaving made a huge tapestry above me, and then, as if from nowhere, it was sky again. The trees were behind me, and I was standing in a clearing with the yurt directly in front of me. It all seemed quite sudden, for when I was standing behind the sink and looking through the kitchen window, the yurt seemed to be appearing from another time altogether. It was as though the yurt had traveled through time to make a momentary appearance, and I couldn't reconcile this feeling with how close the yurt was to the house when I ventured toward it. There it was, right behind the cluster of trees, and the door to the yurt was creaking loudly since the wind had picked up in the time it had taken me to walk toward it. I pushed the door all the way open and stepped in. It was pitch dark inside. No light from the world was creeping through. I still had a box of matches in my hand since right before spotting the yurt, I had wanted to light the stove to make my coffee. I lit one, the wind blew. I lit another and held it right above my face, where one would hold a portable torch if one had one, and saw rows and rows of shelves on the walls. I wanted to walk toward them, but there was something obstructing my path. It looked like a wooden canoe, and then I saw an oar, and the match blew out. I couldn't confirm anything. I lit another match and looked down at my feet. There was a canoe, and I stepped into it and out of it on the other side, and came close enough to the shelves that I was able to touch them. They were dusty. I was holding the match in my other hand, and I could see things only in small portions as I held the light of the match up to them. I must get out, I thought, and then the wind slowed and I could hear the leaves shuffle in the low breeze outside, just beyond the yurt. There's a reason for everything, I said to myself, a reason for having come to the yurt, and then his name formed in my chest. FRA Keeler, I murmured. I hummed. The wind picked up. FRA Keeler, I said, and his name poured from my lips the way water pours from a fountain, in long streams, uninterrupted, and just as I said his name, I was standing out in the clearing again. I noticed the leaves on the trees looked greener, as though the bark had bled into them. I didn't know how long I had been inside the yurt. The sky was heavier now, a morbid color. I could feel it pressing against the back of my neck, folding me down to the ground. I pressed back against it and walked as quickly as I could through the trees. The air grew cold, and then quite suddenly everything was wet with rain. It was as though a tap had opened in the sky. Water was dripping off the leaves, pouring in streams, the way his name was pouring from my lips uncontrollably when I stood in the yurt. Had I fumbled my way out of it without knowing? I turned around to look beyond the trees. I wanted to see it again, to confirm its existence. I looked hard through the clearing to where the yurt had been. My boots were caked with mud from the rain. There was a streak of lightning. The yurt flashed before my eyes. I heard the door swing open. It blasted hard against something. The canoe, I thought. The hinges on the door must have loosened in the wind. I couldn't see clearly. I looked again through the trees. I was squinting. I looked down at my hands to see if they were still dusty from the shelves, but they had been wiped clean by the rain. Water was pouring, violently coming down through everything. My face was burning in the cold. The yurt flashed again before my eyes, silver and radiant in the lightning. But it was an image of the yurt, an instant, a flash, nothing else. It was I who was reproducing it there, an image of the yurt I kept projecting. Blood was swirling in my brain. I looked again, but this time nothing appeared, and I ran through the yard toward the house. I pulled the storm door open. Inside, everything looked the same, only it was a little dimmer than before. A dull gray light had settled around the edges of things, and the countertops seemed heavier. All the machinery of the kitchen seemed older in the gray light, and rounder, more anchored into the ground. Inside, I rested against the sink. I was panting. I reached to turn on the tap. Water gurgled, then flowed in steady streams. Everything was in order. The coffee grinder, the cup, the sponge with which I had wanted to wipe the counter. I looked again through the window to the other side of the trees, into the clearing that lay beyond them, but could see nothing. Only the wind thrashing the branches of the trees. And it was then his name rose again to my lips. FRA Keeler, I said, though this time more exasperated than before. I was wheezing from the wind, and I could hear myself hissing his name under my breath. FRA Keeler, I rasped. FRA Keeler, I said again, until I was hissing like the wind. I awoke hours later. It was pitch dark, and there were papers strewn all around me. I remembered standing by the sink, watching the trees. I looked on the floor. My clothes were scattered about there, on the tiles. I had undressed. I sat up and reached across the floor. My clothes were still damp from the rain. There was a musty smell in the house, like something old had crept in and settled itself in the furniture, on the countertops, in the cabinets, between things. My head was throbbing. Any minute now, I thought to myself, it is going to explode. I couldn't remember falling asleep or undressing. The last visible point in my mind was the kitchen sink, myself standing over it, looking through the window for the yurt. I couldn't understand where all the papers had come from. I couldn't remember carrying anything back from the yurt. In fact, hadn't I looked down at my hands, weren't they empty? The papers did a wild dance around me. The room turned and turned. I closed my eyes. I drifted. Thank you.
Thanks, Azareen. Our next reader is Tracy O'Neill. Tracy O'Neill is a writer living in Brooklyn. In 2012, she was awarded the New York City Emerging Writers Fellowship by the Center for Fiction. Her novel, The Hopeful, was published in June 2015, and her short fiction has appeared or is forthcoming in Guernica, Granta, The Literarian, Volume 1 Brooklyn, and Promethean. You can read her nonfiction in The Atlantic, Grantland, Book Forum, Rolling Stone, and thenewyorker.com. She currently teaches at FIT and the City College of New York. Tracy.
Hello, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. So I'm going to read from the first chapter. I had a bus to catch in 10 minutes, and the only way I'd make it was with a pair of scissors. Before the accident, the first psychologist prescribed this and other visualization exercises for my success. There was one in which I imagined a red windmill turning blue with positivity and blowing away fear. In another, a lung expanded to inhale confidence and contracted to exhale doubt. This one involved a hairy monster, which I was to confront with scissors and trim into a small, manageable form. It's wonders what a new do can do for a girl. Catching the bus was never a problem until getting out of bed was, but you can't make excuses. Get out of bed. Get out of bed, I told myself. Use the imperative, is what Dr. Ogden had advised. Affirmative statements only. If you say, don't do this, or don't do that, you're thinking about what you don't want to do, not what you do. Except when I listened to him, I mostly thought about the things I didn't want that would happen if I said, don't do this. The problem with sports psychologists is that they have limited imaginations. It's all if-then statements. If you practice, then you will perfect. If you believe, then you will achieve. But if you accidentally think wrongly, then what? This had been my problem with the triple sow cow. I kept watching myself fall, or collide with the barrier of the rink, or chicken out. Imagining got to be like death. I knew it would happen, but not how. By the time Dr. Ogden got to if-then statements, I wouldn't trust someone like me with my own well-being. And here's another if-then statement. If I was still skating, then I would not have needed to try to get out of bed. How do you feel? My father asked me the first time I skated. Greedy, I said. It was true. I could never get enough. But now in bed, I could hear the thin clock arms marking seconds, populous and bland as rabbits, tick-tock, tick-tock, tick, and knew the difference between the rhythm of a metronome and a song. I tried to materialize scissors for the exercise, but instead saw only a 4-post bed. Sit, roll over, fetch, I commanded, but the mind is like most teenagers. If all the other kids were jumping off of bridges with underpants on their heads, should I too? I used to ask my mother when she suggested that maybe I would rather go to school like other kids, see movies, eat cookies. This would be before most businesses were open, and she'd be driving me to the rink. I would have woken her, scrambled egg whites, brushed my teeth. But that's what days became, teeth brushing, tiny back and forths, up and downs, just to do it again. There are no decisive victories with dental hygiene. There is only not losing until a waitress forgets to hold the onions. And when I thought of not losing for the rest of my life, bed was just as good a place as any other. That was no thought to get me up, of course. So for just a moment, I let my foot forget it was part of Middle America. I let myself lapse pastward, my foot pointing as it used to when my entire body pivoted around the axis of one toe, and I felt as I did when my life consisted of perfect circles, when it was all figure eights and laps around the rink. I closed my eyes and was back again, spinning on that slippery plane, and everything streaked together into ribbons of color so that I could not discern separate forms. But I knew where I was going. The ice, flatter and more perfect than the kind that forms in nature, revealed the path cut by my blades beneath me. I was flying without wings, contorting through the cold. My coach Lauren called out, "Arms, arms," and a Prince song about how he loved someone more than when she belonged to him played. The music wasn't my warm-up tapes, but Ryan's, and we didn't evaluate his choices because he was an Olympic shoo-in. A shoo-in is a mundane expression for someone whose victory seems predetermined. I wasn't a shoo-in, but a hopeful, an eloquent expression for someone whose victory is yet to be determined. Puberty could end my life, I knew. There were girls from the rink who were shoo-ins until bodily curves flattened their ability to jump faster than you can say circumference. I would not even look at bras in department stores, for the mind's eye determines the future, as Dr. Ogden once said. I didn't know how it happened. I was 16 and I was maybe getting too old. I made calculations. For the 2010 Olympics, I'd be 18. In 2014, I'd be 22. And no one skates in the Olympics at 26. My year was worth only 6 minutes, really only 2.5 if I screwed up badly enough. I was training for the New England Regional Championships, the qualifying competition for the Eastern Sectional Championships, which was the qualifying competition for the National Championships. If I did well enough during the technical program portion of the competition, I would be allowed to skate my long program. But if not, then I wouldn't even be permitted 6 minutes to not blow my year. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Our next reader tonight is Megan Cruz. Megan Cruz grew up in the rural Pacific Northwest. She studied creative writing at Oberlin College and earned her MFA at the University of Montana, where she wrote about lonely places and our faulty, beautiful hearts. Her work has appeared widely in journals and anthologies, and she recently completed residencies at the Himmel Harding Nelson Center for the Arts in Nebraska and the New York Mills Regional Cultural Center in Minnesota. Her debut novel, Call Me Home, was released from Hawthorne Books in 2015. She is the 2015 to 2016 visiting writer in residence at Eastern Oregon's University's Low Residency MFA program. She currently lives in Seattle. Megan Cruz.
Hi, everyone. A little taller. Thank you all for having us here. This has been a really tremendous honor, and thank you to everyone who came out. My book is written in 3 parts. It is written from the perspective of a mother and her 2 children, Jackson and Lydia. So I thought I would just read you a little bit from each of the children's perspectives, and hopefully it should be pretty. It's really difficult to figure out what you're going to read in a novel without confusing people. They're like, who's that and why do I care? So I'm just going to start with Lydia Tulalip, Washington, 2005. We built forts. We built little homes from blowdowns in stands of alder. We sat crouched in nests of sword fern, eating red huckleberries. We took off our shoes and wrapped maple leaves around our feet like moccasins until they tore, and then we walked barefoot through the black piney loam and leaf fall. Our skin stung from nettles, and the air smelled of skunk cabbage and rain. We followed the creek and knew each of the ponds that pooled beside it. We ruined our shoes. We collected sticks and handfuls of dry pine needles from the pockets beneath roots and rocks, where they were shielded from the rain. We made rings of stones and tried to light fires with the sticks, the dry needles, the paper and lint in our pockets. The fires smoked and our old hall passes curled under the lick of flames and then went dead. We used our thumbnails to split the blisters on the trunks of pine trees so the pitch spilled out and stained our palms. We told stories about the wolf boy who lived in the woods and the fire trail ghost who would run beside your car and grab you in the dark. We told secrets. Lydia, my brother, told me the way that girls feel about boys is the way I feel about them, like I might marry a boy someday. Like gay? Yes. You're a homo? I asked. Yes, he said. I thought for a minute. Jackson was looking at me. His hands were shaking, pulling an alder leaf into pieces and letting them drift to the ground. I understand, I said, and I did. Between us, we knew everything already. We practiced survival. We stripped the leaves from fireweed and chewed them to a bitter cud. We found tangles of blackberry and drank straight from the creek. We sat in an old rowboat that was abandoned in the woods. In the heavy rain, we turned it upside down, curled underneath it in the dirt and salal. We lured a stray dog through the woods with pieces of stale bread and talked to him in low voices. He was skittish and thin, and we named him Green for his eyes. When we whistled for him, he would appear, a moving shadow between the trees. When we touched his fur with cold, careful hands, we knew that he was meant for us. When we heard voices from the house, we went deeper into the woods and looked for bleeding hearts and trilliums on the mud-slick slopes on either side of the creek, and when we found them, we did not pick them. We knew how rare they were, how beautiful, and how quickly they would wilt in our hands. I hate him, I told Jackson. I wish that he would die. I wish he would go to jail. I wish he would move far away and never come back. Sometimes, Jackson said, I still love him. My brother could look so sad sometimes, but I don't think I should, he said. I imagined that if our father disappeared, then we would move into the forest, Jackson, my mother, and me. We would have the whole woods and the creek, and the leaves would flash and spin around us. We would have everything. In spring, when the brush was thick, we followed the creek for 3 miles to an old trailer camp. The trailers were empty in the winter and maybe all year round. Through the windows, we saw the dirty kitchens, the stacks of books, the bare mattresses. I imagined that each one was a different life waiting for us. I imagined that somewhere in the woods I would find the right one, and that it would find me, and it would call me home. If it was a good day, our mother would come into the woods and crawl into the fort. She would pour us invisible coffee from the curl of a leaf. I was 8 years old. Jackson was older, and I understood that all of this was for me, and that my brother was better than most brothers. I drank from my leaf, lying in the crooks of their warm arms. You were born for just this, they whispered. They held me between them. You were born for happiness, for great things. You were born so we could love you. So, the crux of the story involves the mother and daughter. The mother's in an abusive relationship. And she tries to leave with her children, and the boy, Jackson, does this kind of really crappy thing where he tells his father where they're at in a moment of like teenage jerkiness. I'm trying to watch my language because it's the Library of Congress. I don't usually talk like that. So he does this, and they end up separated. The mother takes the daughter with her, and the son kind of goes out on his own. He's 18, he's gay, and she wants him to kind of try to find a new life. So he ends up on a construction site in Idaho, in the town of Silver, Idaho, working on a construction site and having an affair with his older married boss. So I'm just going to read you a little scene from that. Are we okay on time? Okay. As he made his way toward the work site, it happened again. He thought he saw his mother. This time it was a woman, an older woman in sweatpants and a dark coat buttoned high around her throat, and as soon as it happened, it was over. It wasn't her. There was no pattern to these moments except that he'd come to expect them, even to welcome them, and at the same time this did not diminish the surprise in it. It embarrassed him, the simplicity of what it represented, a simple, forgiving reunion, and afterwards he would feel hurt and angry at himself at the way that he could dream for such a clear impossibility. He'd be walking from the work site or past the row of new houses, and a dog might run between the trees, or a carpenter would be stooping in a pile of useful debris, picking out nails or reclaiming his scattered tools. However unlikely these ordinary articles would assemble themselves into the form of his mother at her most gallant and admirable, wearing a dress that he had only seen in the occasional photograph that surfaced from the early days of his parents' marriage. It was his mother as he had never known her, picking her way over sawdust and twisted links of orange construction tape, walking toward him. His mother as she would have looked down at some roadhouse in Texas where the plank boards were treated with beer to a dark shine. His mother with none of the stiffness or disappointment of his mother now. She would approach him near one of the work trucks, elbow on the rusted bed. Oh, she would say, "Oh, Jackson, it's all been fine, it's been just fine." He would grasp then when he shook his head a little and the dog became a rangy mutt, or the carpenter straightened with his arms full of tools, just exactly what it was he was going to lose. His mother's past, her present, all of it. The times that had so captivated him as a child, the times before he existed at all, were even farther from him. Somewhere far from him, she was going to grow old. He wanted so badly for her to materialize, to come out of the woods in that old dress, the one he remembered from when he was young, the one that he had maybe even created in his mind. He would tell her he thought that he had been wrong, more wrong than he could have ever imagined, and instead of acknowledging that he had done her in, had not treated her as a son should treat his mother, but more like an enemy, and she would just lean against that truck and smile. "Oh, well," she would say, "we go on, don't we?" The woman kept walking. The wind picked up. He kicked through the leaves to the work site, to the day that was waiting for him, the day that he was late to. Thanks.
The next honoree to read tonight is Angela Flournoy. Also, and thank you, Megan. Angela Flournoy is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, where she received a Dean's Fellowship, and the University of Southern California. She has taught writing at the University of Iowa and Trinity Washington University, and has worked for the Washington, D.C. Public Library. She was raised in Southern California by a mother from Los Angeles and a father from Detroit. The Turner House, her first novel, was a finalist for the 2015 National Book Award for Fiction. Angela.
Hello. Thank you all for being here. It's a great honor, and I see some familiar faces, so thank you, friends, for coming on this sort of semi-gross evening. So my novel is set mostly in 2008 in Detroit, but there are sections that are sort of jump around in the past, mostly in the 40s, but I'm going to read a section from the 60s, and I think the only thing you need to know, it's 90 pages in, but I think the only thing you need to know is that Cha-Cha is the eldest of 13 siblings. Pretty much anyone he talks to is younger than him, but related to him. In the summer of 1967, when Cha-Cha was 23, he worked at the Lynch Road assembly plant, putting together Dodge Chargers. In June of that year, Viola announced she was pregnant again at 40 years old. This 13th and final pregnancy might have been the most memorable event of the summer if only Detroit, the country, and maybe even the entire world had seen a different July. On the morning that Detroiters began to realize the skirmish on 12th and Claremont had morphed into something larger, Cha-Cha and his fellow line workers went to the plant as usual. Anxiety crackled off of people's skin like static. Nervous behavior led to carelessness, and by lunchtime, Cha-Cha's coveralls were splattered with the blood of another man, a man who let himself get distracted. He left the plant determined to find a new job. Before that July, a burning building felt like a particular and tragic occurrence to Cha-Cha. The smell of brick and clothes and small pets smoldering urged a person to stand tall like a prairie dog and crane his neck in search of the emergency. Afterward, a burning house became an olfactory norm akin to skunk spray. As long as the source of the odor wasn't too close, you eventually ignored it. Cha-Cha's shared apartment on Forest and McDougal had no kitchen, so when he felt particularly lonely, he used the excuse of needing a home-cooked meal to come back and check on things at the Yarrow house. If he'd had no younger siblings to worry about, he might have joined his own friends from the neighborhood in search of new shoes, lightweight appliances, anything with resale potential. He wasn't above recreational looting. But as the eldest, he kept in mind that the fires, the looting, and any police beatings all qualified as reasons a Turner boy might get into serious trouble or maybe even die. He felt responsible for making sure nothing happened. Quincy was in Army boot camp in South Carolina. Miles, Duke, and Troy were all under the age of 8 and therefore still under Viola's thumb. This left Lonnie and Russell. The two of them were standing on the porch when Cha-Cha pulled up. "Everybody in the house?" Cha-Cha asked. "Yeah," Lonnie said. "Except Daddy's not home yet. They're saying on TV there's a curfew tonight. They got snipers on the roof shooting at the police." Lonnie stood with his chest puffed out, his bony shoulders thrust back. He was 13, but already as tall as Russell, with tight knots of prepubescent muscle on his arm and his father's strong chin. Neither him nor Russell asked Cha-Cha about the blood on his collar. "Where y'all going?" Cha-Cha asked. "To get bricks," Russell said. Cha-Cha stared at his brother as if he didn't comprehend. He knew Viola was kneeling on the couch on the other side of the front window, listening. He walked toward the door. Russell stepped in front of him. "I said we're gonna go get bricks, Cha, and we want you to come with us." "I heard what you said. You see all that smoke? They probably shooting niggas on the west side by now," he said. "Well, we on the east side," Lonnie said. "I heard they looting on Harper too," Cha-Cha said. "So? I'm not finna sit up in that house like a girl, watching everything on the news," Lonnie said. His new, deeper voice cracked as he spoke. "Kowski pays a nickel a brick," Russell said. "All this shit going on, you think anybody cares about the bricks we take from tore-up buildings? We could be doing a lot better money-wise, but ain't nobody gonna shoot us over bricks." When he was 16, Cha-Cha had also felt and looked as much of a man as Russell did. He knew that no matter what Russell felt like inside, living in the Yarrow house meant he was still considered a child. Still reduced to bickering with younger siblings and begging Viola for pocket money. to wait patiently while Viola, eyes closed, mouth scrunched, rooted around in her purse and extracted a few crumpled dollars was the ultimate humiliation. Russell sometimes worked for a Polish man he called Kowski, short for a longer name Cha-Cha never knew. He swept up trash and debris on construction sites in East Detroit. A nickel per brick could add up quickly. Cha-Cha agreed to go with him. He wasn't old enough to forbid Russell and Lonnie from doing what they wanted, or strong enough to drag them both back into the house. He turned his back on the window where his mother was likely spying on them and offered his truck for the transport of bricks. Every block seemed devoid of women. Most porches were empty. A half dozen were occupied by young men and older boys, their postures communicating a readiness to protect whatever resided on the other side of their thresholds. Russell guided them to a house several streets west of Yarrow. It sat on a block abutting Harper, and its overgrown yard suggested it had been vacant even before flames from the neighboring dry cleaner burned through its roof and much of its second floor. By 1967, whites had already started the retreat to the suburbs, leaving vacant houses in their wake if black folks couldn't afford to buy or rent them quickly enough. Cha-Cha stayed on the sidewalk while his brothers went to the side of the house. Judging from the way Lonnie walked ahead and Russell kept looking back, it was clear that the younger of the two had set this plan in motion. Although he was underage, Lonnie had talked himself into a job with Ron Volok's Universal Teen Sales Club. Volok organized carloads of colored teens to go door to door in white neighborhoods selling overpriced goods, dish soap, thermometers, measuring cups, to fearful housewives. Lonnie was a top salesman that summer, an expert at convincing ostensibly smart people to do stupid things. Alone out front, Cha-Cha heard the whoop, whoop, whoop of helicopters and the frenzied beat of fire truck sirens. The sound seemed to be moving away from him, toward the northwest of the city. He realized they should have had a better plan, one including a wheelbarrow. They wouldn't be able to make very many trips without attracting suspicion, and they needed 20 bricks just to make $1. The ferric scent of blood from his work short made him queasy. He should have at least changed clothes. Cha-Cha's particular duty on the assembly line at work was to wait until a team of 3 men, led by a fellow named Bryson, bolted the body of the charger to the lower frame. A train track-style conveyance then brought the charger to Cha-Cha's bench. He had to reach under the body, connect a hose to the gas pump, and use a set of brackets to secure the rear axle. At first, the line had moved smoothly despite everyone's nerves, but soon Bryson's team fell behind. Each bench had an approximate minute to complete its job before another car came down. Plenty of time in normal conditions. To prevent any backups, one relief man oversaw a clump of benches and jumped in to help speed a job along if necessary. Cha-Cha and Bryson's relief man was Michel, a large, curly-haired white boy from Montreal. Maybe it had been too long since Michel had helped out the line. Maybe Michel's mind was on the fighting and the fires in the streets. A minute should have been long enough to get Bryson's team caught up before the next charger reached them. In a minute's time, Michel managed to lodge his thumb between the lower frame and the upper body of the car, and Bryson's team bolted the 2 pieces together without noticing. The line stopped moving. Cha-Cha looked down and saw the blood sprayed across his own coveralls. Now Lonnie and Russell loped toward Cha-Cha with large heaps of bricks in their arms. They dumped them into the back of the truck. Russell's chubby cheeks were smudged with soot, the front of his shirt drenched in sweat. "Come on back and help us, Cha. That way we can get out of here quicker." Cha-Cha agreed. Lonnie and Russell sorted through the bricks, and Cha-Cha cradled the ones they passed to him. Russell had brought along a tiny hammer to knock off bits of mortar from the edges of the bricks. Lonnie wanted to climb down into the ruined basement where most of the bricks would have fallen, but Russell pointed out that the bad air quality might suffocate them. What kind of adulthood was this? Cha-Cha wondered. He watched his teenage brothers hastily appraise ruined bricks for the resale value while the streets raged less than a quarter mile away. He had the feeling he would always be this person, seesawing between adult and child, as long as he stayed in Detroit. Quincy was gone, and in a year's time, Russell would enlist and be gone too. Francis and Viola would surely force Lonnie to leave the city when he was of age. A boy as smart and reckless as Lonnie would come to ruin otherwise. Cha-Cha knew he'd stay here through riots and layoffs and whatever else came. On Cha-Cha's 3rd trip along the side of the house, he saw a police car parked behind his truck. The officer was white, wide around the middle and peering into the brick-filled cab. "You get into trouble." You throw a ball where you shouldn't. You try to brush up against the wrong girl's ass at a party. You take off running. Cha-Cha dropped his bricks, turned around, and ran back to his brothers, ran past them. There was no time to stop and explain. Russell and Lonnie followed him through the backyard of the house, and the three of them jumped the gate to an alley. They separated as soon as they reached the side street. Cha-Cha should have stopped running. Better to look as if he'd been walking all along, then make a slow circle back to his truck. But he couldn't stop himself. He wasn't skilled at acting natural. He thought it smarter to get back to Yarrow as quickly as possible. He ran east through alleys parallel to Seneca. He heard sirens up ahead where Seneca intersected Lambert. He panicked. A house to his left had a raccoon-sized hole in the lattice under its porch. He crouched down, kicked the hole a bit wider, and scooted feet first until he was inside. He lay on his back with his arms folded on his chest. Under the porch smelled like dead leaves and wet fur. Cha-Cha listened for the rustlings of rodents, but heard none. He heard sirens instead, still as close as before, as if the police had parked on the block. He heard himself wheezing long after he believed his heart rate had slowed. He blamed the smoke in the air. Cha-Cha's mind might have wandered for less than 5 minutes or a dangerous 15 minutes. He heard footsteps crunching through the dry summer grass toward him. The sirens had stopped. Slowly, Cha-Cha turned onto his side. He recognized those boots, that slew-footed, toes outward walk. It was his father. Francis was a hummer and a smacker. He hummed the same song mostly, about a train headed to glory, and he smacked as if something sticky was lodged in between his molars. Why didn't he crawl out then and walk with his father home? Cha-Cha didn't know. His heart told him to keep still. Francis stopped very near to Cha-Cha's hole in the porch. He stood there and hummed. Francis burped, and Cha-Cha realized he was drunk. He could smell the beer from where he hid. Only Francis Turner could find time to sneak away and drink during an uprising. Cha-Cha heard him unzip his pants. Earlier that day, when the body of the charger crushed his thumb, Michelle had said, "You can't." Just, "You can't," once, quickly, and then a low-register wail when the bolts were removed and the rest of his hand freed. As Bryson's team carried him away, Michelle mumbled a string of words in French that no one understood. Cha-Cha wanted to yell, "You can't," from under the porch, but he didn't. He merely closed his eyes. Most of the urine did not reach him, but an unforgivable amount splashed onto his forehead. It took nearly 2 minutes for Francis to relieve himself, and Cha-Cha was convinced that Francis had done it to him on purpose. A few years later, when Cha-Cha started tailing his father on his mother's orders, he would learn that this corner on Seneca and Lambert was Francis's preferred one for clandestine drinking and, yes, occasional public urination. The knowledge did nothing to change his initial beliefs. His memories of the event were not swayed by reason. They were the culmination of the wrong kind of day and too many realizations about the kind of life Cha-Cha felt destined to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And before I introduce our final honoree, I just want to say again what an honor it is to be partnering with the Library of Congress and introducing these wonderful writers and sharing them with all of you. Additionally, if you want to learn more about them, you can visit our website, nationalbook.org, or you can come find me afterwards and pick up some of these hopefully fun trading cards that we made of all the writers, and LeVar Burton. Anyway, so our next honoree to read is Colin Barrett. Colin Barrett was born in 1982 and grew up in County Mayo, Ireland. In 2009, he was awarded the Penguin Ireland Prize. His stories have appeared in Stinging Fly magazine, A Public Space, 5 Dials, and The New Yorker. Young Skins is his first book. Please welcome Colin Barrett.
How you doing, guys? This is a collection of short stories. I'm just going to read a short scene from just one of the stories called "Stand Your Skin." It's set in the scene is in a pub in a small town on the west coast of Ireland. The main character is a man by the name of Bat. He's in his mid-20s. He's nicknamed Bat. He's kind of he was kind of randomly assaulted a number of years in the past on a night out, and since then has become something of a recluse socially around town. He works in the local petrol station, and he's got long hair and he loves motorcycles and he drinks a lot, and he hangs out with his kind of only other friends are in the petrol station. It's mainly just like kids, college kids who are kind of working summer jobs. So he's agreed to go and meet two of them. One's called Heg. He's a guy. He's going back to college, and he's thrown a little shindig in the pub. And the other work colleague of his is called Tane, and she's a girl. And just in case the Irish names are somewhat confusing on denoting gender, and she's so she's kind of the youngest. She's in secondary school. She's in kind of high school age. So the two of them are going to see separately. They're coming to this pub to meet Heg, and I'll apologise in advance in the Library of Congress because I will be. There's loads of curses and profanity in this. I kind of looked through the book, and there's like no two paragraphs where there's not a string of profanities because that's Irish people. So you'll have to bear with me, and it's all in the name of art, so we're just going to bear with it. The week rolls on. Friday night, the town centre, Bat in leathers, a pair of preliminary beers washed down to fortify his nerves. It's been a while. He parks his Honda in an alley by the AIB branch, a bank. Shadowed figures linger outside the Yellow Belly pub's entrance. Smokers. Bat approaches with his head lowered. "Fucking Bat again. Bat," a voice says, surprised. "Man, Bat," the other says. "Lads," Bat says. The lads are a bit younger than Bat. Little brothers to those who would have been Bat's peers. One's a Connolly, spotty face like a dropped bolognese. The other's a barrel-bodied, red-headed Duffy. "Which Duffy are you?" Bat asks. "Jamie," the lad replies. "Michael was in my class," Bat says. "We called him Scaldy Balls." Connolly's face erupts in laughter. "We call this cunt the same." "The ginger gene is dying out, so they say," Bat informs Duffy darkly. Duffy braces his shoulders, looks at Connolly, who communicates something back to him with his eyes. "What is you out anyway, Bat?" Connolly asks. "Rob Hegarty's. Fucking off back to college, do." "The brain boxes are off to brainbox land," Connolly sighs. "That time of year, I suppose. Leaving us thick fucks to this dump," Duffy scowls. "All right," Bat says, stopping the conversation. Inside, he takes a couple of short steps up into the warm, red heart of the bar. The main room is a long rectangle, half-familiar faces eddying in its telescoped space. Some faces watch him, some don't. Bat thinks, "I am here for Heg's thing, so I'll go find Heg." Heg is at the farthest point at the rear of the bar. He is surrounded. "Bat, Christ, good man," Heg roars, and his companions' faces turn to take in Bat. There are half a dozen lads Heg's age, and the same number in girls again. The girls. A dark-haired one stands by Heg, cheekboned and smokily glowering. From her emanates a demeanour of regal peevishness, with her nose pinned up in the air. There is the briefest shift of light in her irises. She looks at Bat with the penetrating impersonality of a security camera. Bat drops his eyeline to the floor. He wants to hurl his body at her feet and repent his hideous pelt. "Drink," Bat squeaks, hoping Heg hears. "Come here, lads. You know this fucking legend of a man." Heg loafs an arm across Bat's shoulders. He's had a few, Heg. His gaze is lolling and sliding like syrup as he tries to fix upon Bat. "Na-na-na-na-na-na-na, Batman!" Heg roars. Bat winces, shucks off the dead weight of Heg's arm. "Pint, Heg," he says again. Bat cuts a paddling diagonal through the crowd, riding up along the polished grain of the counter like a drowning man gaining the shore. He actually grips the counter. He orders 2 pints, one for himself, one for Heg, and downs his own pint in a single ferocious engorgement. He slams the empty onto the counter as a head rush ignites behind his eyes. He sees sparks and a wavelet of nausea migrates from the middle of his face into the pit of his stomach. Bat orders another pint. When he turns, a girl who looks like Tane is facing him. It is Tane, in makeup, in a dress. Bat's eyes drop in a skimming vertical, compiling fugitive impressions before he can restrain himself. Her dress is a shiny kind of silvery red thing, a square of absent material exposing a section of her chest. The dress's hem ends midway down her thighs. Tane's legs are bare. Bat has never seen Tane's legs before. Her knees are miraculously, mundanely knee-like, blunt, knobby, and flushed scaldingly red as if in embarrassment at so public an exposure. Bat gets a grip, forces eye contact with her. I know, Tane says, mournfully. She's blushing. She has a parcel wrapped in silver paper under her arm. Is that a present for himself, Bat says. Tane holds it out and rotates the parcel assessingly in her grip. Pretty gay of me, I think. Why would it be gay? She glances across at the crowd surrounding Haig. Who's that one with him? Don't know, Bat says. His sister, maybe? Fuck no, that's not his sister, Bat. Are you being funny? I've seen his sister. She's a trainee vet in London. That is not his sister. The dimensions of the parcel and the way it bends in a U shape as Tane tortures it in her grip, Bat guesses it's a book. Bat is no reader. His eyesight has always been poor, the other derivation of his nickname. He wears contacts now, but as a kid he suffered for years, believing the scumbled, dripping appearance of text on a page was simply how words appeared to everyone. It seemed perfectly in keeping with the sadism of classwork that you had to try and prize sense from an unintelligible fuzz of type stamped on a page. The teachers thought him thick, and Bat was thick, but it was only when some of the other kids dubbed him book sniffer on account of how close he put his face to the page that he realized something was up. What you get him, Bat means, the book. Has anyone else got him anything? Tane says, still craning towards the group. I got him nothing other than this pint, Bat says, and I'd offer you one, but you're too young. Tane swivels with slow decisiveness back to Bat. She makes a fist and wedges it against her hip. Christ's sakes, just get me a vodka and lime, Bat. Thank you. Leave it there for me.
All right, thanks to all of our readers. Another hand again for the 2015 535 honorees.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.